Good evening, welcome to the Super Saturday debate. I'm Zaka Jacob. The storm over the BBC's controversial documentary on the 2002 Gujarat riots has now gone into top gear. More than 300 signatories have penned a strongly worded letter against the BBC and its documentary. The list of 302 eminent citizens consists of 13 retired judges, 133 retired bureaucrats, 33 ambassadors and 156 retired armed forces officers. The letter says the documentary exposes the BBC's malafide intentions. The letter also says that the BBC's documentary is not a neutral critique. So the question we're asking on the Super Saturday debate, is it time for India to call out the Western media's biases?
There is no factual reporting in the BBC documentary at all. They keep talking about allegedly this and reportedly that. And above all, they have ignored completely the decisions of the Indian judiciary.
This particular documentary of two parts was a visible example of the fact that although it's a public broadcasting service, it does these programs which are highly discriminatory.
जो बीबीसी है वो एक एजेंडा चलाता है ब्रिटिश मीडिया का बेसिकली इंपीरियलिस्टिक माइंड है इनका
All right, let's bring you up to speed with what these eminent citizens have said in their letter against the British Broadcasting Corporation. Number one, they have said that this series by the BBC is based on delusional and lopsided reporting. Number two, they have said it's an archetype of the British imperialism, acting as both judge and jury. Attack number three, they've gone on to say that the documentary is nefarious, it reeks of distorted motivation. Also, it goes on to say that the BBC sidelined the core fact that the Supreme Court of India ruled out any role by Prime Minister Modi. Attack number 5, it says you don't need colonial outsiders who believe in divide and rule. Then it goes on to ask the question whether the BBC should act against their own biases against Prime Minister Modi. So this letter has been written by 300 eminent Indian citizens, but we've got a piece of breaking news that's coming right through here on the Super Saturday debate. As per sources, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has now issued directions for the blocking of multiple YouTube sites and links to the BBC documentary. Orders were also issued to Twitter for the blocking of 50 tweets containing the links of this concerned YouTube videos. Both YouTube and Twitter have complied with the directions, is the word that we have from the government. Let me go across to my colleague Pallavi Ghosh, who has more details. So the government going all out saying that YouTube links, Twitter links, any other social media links of this documentary need to be taken down.
Absolutely, Zaka. In fact, there have been several rounds of meetings of the officials of the IT ministry, the INB ministry, the MHA as well. And the conclusion that they've come to is that these kind of links which are being propagated through YouTube, through Twitter, are actually derogatory in nature. And also, they harm the unity and integrity as well as the sovereignty of our country. And that's the reason why this direction has been issued to take them down.
And very quickly, the MEA in its briefing a couple of days ago called this reeking of a colonial mindset, that it was distorted, and no less than the Supreme Court has gone into the merits of this matter. So the government now, on the one hand, asking YouTube and Twitter to take down these links, yet at the same time saying that this is reeking of a colonial mindset. What is the strategy at play here? And most importantly, Pallavi, this is the G20 year. This is when India will host the biggest countries, the biggest economies in the world. Does the government feel there will be these attempts to try and derail that narrative?
Not just that, Zaka, what government sources have been telling us all along is that they sniff a conspiracy. That this is a deliberate attempt by a certain section of an ecosystem which is targeting our country, not just or G20 presidents history of our country, but also the run-up to a 2024 Lok Sabha. That's about wording, the clean sheet, and also the fact that how while the BBC has not shared this link directly with India, what they have certainly done is that it's now being used extensively, propagated through the YouTube and Twitter and other social media platforms, which is why INB ministry sources are telling us that they had to go through this entire procedure over the last few days to ensure that rules were followed, and these accounts are completely frozen, and that direction has been given both to YouTube as well as to Twitter.
All right, Pallavi Ghosh, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much for joining us at the top of the Super Saturday debate. Let me now open this up to our panelists and get their thoughts on this. Shazia Ilmi, BJP spokesperson, is joining us. Anil Trigunayat is a former diplomat. He's also one of the signatories among the 300 who signed this letter. Vaseek is a writer and commentator. And Alak Alok Srivastav is an advocate on record with the Supreme Court. Shazia Elmi, let me start with you. There are two issues. Number one, there is nothing in this BBC documentary that provides new evidence of the role of anyone who was in power or government at that time, including the then Chief Minister of Gujarat and the current Prime Minister. And two, the issue is also that no less than the Supreme Court of India looked into the merits of this matter and found that there was no evidence to show that the then leadership actively propagated these riots or were looking the other way when these riots happened.
Well, Zaka, I would like to say right in the beginning that, it is pretty alarming that BBC would choose at this point of time to make a documentary on the same old hackneyed subject, something they have been trying to charge our Prime Minister and the then Chief Minister Modi ji with. The fact of the matter is that it has this Supreme Court panel has unambiguously stated that there is clearly not evidence to support an accusation such as this, but more so, maximum judicial scrutiny of any riot that India has witnessed has been that of the Gujarat riot. Whether it's judicial scrutiny, judicial examination, public examination, media trials, out of all the communal riots in this country that the country has seen and witnessed and suffered and endured, this has been one that has been the most talked about. So to say that the Muslims and Sikhs killed elsewhere in other riots do not matter. But clearly done with an intention which is completely politically motivated and not born out of any affection or sincerity towards any community. So my problem is the complete disregard and this entire white man's burden and the colonial mindset and, absolute disdain for our Supreme Court, our country, our institutions. That is what gets me.
Okay.
And
Let me ask,
the fact that India is playing a major role.
Okay.
India has trumped UK's economy.
Correct.
And, just to slam India with something like this.
Let me ask Anil Trigunayat. He's also one of the 300 signatories of this letter. Two things that stand out for me. Number one, like I said, there is no new revelation, no new fact, no new information that's been shared in this BBC documentary. And two, you had the MEA spokesperson a couple of days ago calling this reeking of a colonial mindset. The Prime Minister of Britain, no less, Rishi Sunak, in Parliament saying he does not agree with the characterization of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I want to know then what are the motivations? What are the motivations of Britain's public broadcaster in showing what many are considering a lopsided version of events of what happened 20 years ago in Gujarat?
Well, Zaka, I remember during my career having dealt with the Western media from US to different European countries. And everywhere in the Western, there is a mindset which wants to show India as a poor, deprived country where things just don't work and everything is So they cannot just tolerate that in India, which is resurgent today, and Prime Minister Modi, frankly, has taken it to different heights. And that is where, when they don't find anything today, you are chairing G20, you have surpassed the UK's economy, and you have a Hindu Prime Minister basically in UK now. So obviously, that gentleman who was Mr. Hussain, who is of Pakistani origin, wanted to also do that. So you cannot discount these facts. So when we talk of conspiracy theories, you can also recall the kind of I would say the words used by Bilawal Bhutto against the Prime Minister. So it is exactly the continuation of the same kind of a theory and same kind of a problem that they are continuing through the BBC. And as far as BBC is concerned, it might be a public broadcasting system, but I have hardly ever seen anything very positive about any country, because they believe in good news is no news. So you need to cause the friction. And that's what precisely they are doing by bringing up these kind of baseless arguments and taking 10 people to talk about this and that. This does not make a sensible thing for anybody who's watching, but it's creating communal discord.
Let me ask Wasiq, because the government of India says this is not just an isolated case, that the Western media has its biases when it comes to Prime Minister Modi or Indian democracy and its functioning. It has cited these examples, the New York Times publishing an op-ed back in 2018, which accused Prime Minister Modi of compromising India's democracy and subverting its constitution. The Washington Post publishing an article in 2019, which claimed that Prime Minister Modi's government was pursuing a Hindu nationalist agenda, and that's the root cause of all political turmoil in the region. The Guardian publishing in 2018, accusing Prime Minister Modi and his government of pursuing a Hindutva agenda. So what the government of India has been saying is it's not just the BBC. There are these big-name Western media outlets which have a presupposed sort of agenda against Mr. Modi and his supporters and Indian democracy at large itself. Do you agree with that? And if you don't, then please cite to us examples of Western media reports which have been equally praiseworthy of India and India's efforts over the last couple of years in growing its economy and lifting people out of poverty and creating jobs for people.
Well, thank you. I don't agree with the way the Western media seem to have an anti-Bharat bias or an anti-Modi bias. In fact, I'd rather cite Maulana Shahabuddin Razvi, who comes from the Barelvi sect, who has strongly condemned, for example, the BBC story that talks of poor conditions of Muslims in India. He's also cited the RSS chief, who's assured Muslims that in Bharat that we're looking to work with you hand in hand. And in fact, Modi himself has, Prime Minister Modi himself has also reached out and said we need to reach out more to Muslims of Bharat with no favor. So we don't need their votes. We want to work with them. So why aren't the Western media actually giving some balance to some of that? That's kind of the question that I would rather ask, instead of just focusing that, yes, we know that there is an anti-Modi, anti-Bharat bias, but then why aren't they showing some of the balance? And that's kind of proving the point. All right.
Alak Srivastav, here's the thing. The UK government has been accused of being biased against Narendra Modi. You had no less than the British Prime Minister in Parliament, in the House of Commons, saying that he doesn't agree with the characterization of Prime Minister Modi, yet at the same time his government, which has the powers to act against the BBC, issue it a notice, ask for an explanation, has done nothing. I'm curious to know, what is it that the Foreign Office, the Commonwealth Office, what can they do to ask an explanation from the BBC on why it did this documentary and what its motivations were and why it's not grounded in facts, as has been alleged by the government of India?
Certainly. First of all, I would like to share with you, the documentary released by BBC is a sheer propaganda, a blatant lie, and why it has been published at this point of time, it is very, very obvious. There are four most important reasons why this timing has been chosen. First is India's G20 presidency. Entire world is looking at India. Otherwise, there was no need of highlighting something which is 20 to 21 years old event, and which there is no new evidence, new relevant information which has come to the surface. Second reason is UK is right now having a Prime Minister who is having Indian origin. Third is that India is also going to face an election in the year 2024. And fourth is definitely the way India is rising on the world portal. So these are the obvious reasons why this timing has been chosen, why this documentary has been released at this point of time. Now I just want to say that why certain facts have not been incorporated in this documentary. On 27th of February 2002, a train carrying or train coming from Ayodhya which was having Hindu pilgrims, it was burnt. 59 Hindu pilgrims were burnt alive, including women and children. The government agencies as well as courts conducted thorough inquiry, and it was found that it was completely a radical Islamic extremist propaganda act done to the Hindu pilgrims, and they were killed by them. Those people, those extremists were punished by the Indian courts till the highest court of the country. This fact has not been taken into account by the documentary which is in question. Secondly, there were more than 250 Hindus also who lost their lives in Gujarat riots of 2002. This fact has also not been incorporated in the BBC documentary. Thirdly, so far as Mr. Narendra Modi is concerned, he was given clean chit by none other than Honorable Supreme Court of India, which is the apex court of India. And most importantly, Congress government was having the central government in India. It definitely left no stone unturned in inquiring, in investigating and interrogating even Mr. Modi. Right. And not even an iota of evidence was found by even the Congress government. Okay. So this is quite clear that this documentary is selectively hiding many things in order to meet with its propaganda.
So let me ask Shazia Ilmi, and here's where it gets a little fishy, a little complicated if you will. The British government does have the power to legislate. It can set the overall strategic direction for the BBC. Ofcom, which is the media regulator in Britain, has the power to regulate content to the standards set by the BBC's television, radio, as well as on-demand programs. So far, we have not seen any action either by the British government or by its media regulator, Ofcom, which leads us to ask the question, was this documentary motivated in its intentions? And if it was, what is the British government and what is its media regulator, Ofcom, doing about it?
So I would be ill-advised to comment on the internal matters of another country. Just I would like to state that I think BBC had no business, has no business to discredit our institutions, particularly the apex court, and harp on a subject that is closed and exhibit a political hatred and a subjective bias, almost a visceral hatred for the Prime Minister and the party. This is completely in line with certain other media publications who do not want to look at any factual evidence, want to substantiate their argument or their hatred with any facts. I'm a filmmaker. I'm trained in filmmaking. Cinema verite or documentary filmmaking is something I know about. The purpose of a documentary is to document facts. Where are the facts? Certain facts were mentioned by several panelists here. We can just read them and know about them. But the facts have been omitted only to give a certain impression. What is the purpose behind and what is the motivation is something that I would like to know. Yes, Ofcom is the regulator. And the British citizens, the state does not pay, but the citizens pay for the BBC to have that at arm's length, they keep that distance. So I would not like to give any advice to the people of citizens of the UK or the government. Okay. Just like I would ask them not to interfere in the sovereignty of my country and to back off and to have and to be, careful about how they view our democracy.
All right.
And our
Anil
Supreme Court
Trigunayat, as one of the signatories of this letter, two things. One, now that the UK Prime Minister has pretty much, said what he thinks about it, and he thinks that the characterization is wrong, will this have any kind of negative impact on the India-Britain relationship, as it were, at a time when both countries are trying to sign off on an FTA? And more importantly, what can the government of India do? Because it has put out this statement, it's called it propaganda, malicious propaganda, reeking of a colonial mindset. But beyond these words and these characterizations, as it were, what is it that the government of India can do against the BBC and against this documentary? Precious little.
You know, Zaka, something about this kind of a news, essentially, which is malicious, and it has served its purpose by being broadcast already. Now we have to just minimize the damage that is done. And the fact that it is not repeated once again, but as you have already shown several clips, it is a consistent campaign against India, and it will continue to remain there. So how do we use, I mean, this time maybe our High Commission would have protested to the British government about it. We have already heard British Prime Minister's statement. He has distanced himself from this. But the fact remains that the BBC is a government or a public broadcasting system, and they can, if they wish to, regulate it. But I don't think so, because see, UK's policies with regard to Kashmir, with regard to various issues in India, and then, you know, human rights and all kinds of things we have heard all through. Secondly, they are unable to digest the fact that India, which they controlled at one time as their empire, the crown and their jewel, is today bypassed them or is going far beyond it. They really are not in the reckoning at all. So these are the things that will continue to be there. So we have to have a very robust media strategy executed through our diplomatic missions, which everybody does.
All right, we'll leave it at that. What I'll say is that, look, this is an important year for India. It's the host of the G20. Do expect these kind of attacks from the sidelines, as it were. Not necessarily from state players, maybe even sometimes non-state players, but this is par for course, and this is how it's going to be for the next few months, because let's face it, there are people out there who cannot grudge India's rise as a global power and a global super economy, as it were. We'll leave it at that. I want to thank all our guests. I want to move on to another piece of breaking news that's coming in. The WFI, in this ongoing standoff between the Wrestling Federation and the protesting wrestlers, the WFI Assistant Secretary Vinod Tomar has been suspended by the government. The wrestlers were also not happy with Tomar, not just with the WFI President Brij Bhushan. Let me go across to Arun Danta, who's more details. So, basis what has the Assistant Secretary Vinod Tomar also been suspended from the WFI?
Well, Zaka, remember that this was one of the demands of the wrestlers when they were meeting with the Sports Minister Anurag Thakur and the officials, because they have not only raised the questions of sexual assault, but they have also said the management and the functioning of the Wrestling Federation of India, and therefore they were demanding the dismantling of the entire federation. And therefore the Ministry of Sports has suspended the Assistant Secretary Vinod Tomar, and in that that press release, Ministry says that they have taken the serious note of the reports about the functioning of the WFI, including the role of Vinod Tomar, and has reason to believe that his continued presence will be detrimental to the development of this high priority discipline. So we can say, Zaka, this is also a signal to the wrestlers that they are going, the ministry, the government is going in that direction in which wrestlers want them, and perhaps we'll see.
Let's see how this story plays out. So the Assistant Secretary has been now suspended by the government, and that's what the wrestlers are asked for. But clearly, all is not well between the wrestlers and the WFI. Tomorrow is that emergency meeting. We'll see how this story plays out. In the meanwhile, thank you very much for tuning in to the Super Saturday Debate. Good night.